Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is all about choosing books for the Year 4 classroom. I'm Nikki Gamble and I'm director at Just Imagine. And as with all of these choosing books for the classroom webinars, I'm joined today by a very special guest, Jo Bowers. It has been a professional delight and privilege to have worked with Jo and to be increasingly working with Jo on a closer and closer basis. Jo is currently the reviews editor at Just Imagine, but she has a long career in education. So I think perhaps we'll start by me inviting Jo to tell you a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Nikki, and I'm really delighted to be here. And absolutely, yes, I mirror back at you that how lovely it is to be working so much more closely with you now. I'll start at here and now. Is that yes? Since I recently retired from my educational career in sort of university life, I've joined Nikki as the reviews editor on Just Imagine, which is an absolute wonderful kind of joyful work that I'm doing with Nikki. Not just working with Nikki, which that in itself is lovely, but just seeing all the books that come through the door that I send out to our reviews panel every month. Feels a real treat to be able to see what's out there and what's coming. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing to do. I'm also working with Nikki with teacher resources as well on her Reading Gladiators program. So it's very exciting. It's really lovely to do. But leading up to that, I was for about nearly 20 years a primary school teacher and a literacy lead for nearly 20 years as well. I left there to become a lecturer in teacher training in primary education for 12 years. And across all of that time, I've always been involved with different organisations, the United Kingdom Literary Association, the English Association's English 4 to 11 magazine, which publishes primary articles that are inspirational literacy projects, if anybody doesn't know about it out there. And I've also been involved in running a Teachers Reading for Pleasure group with teachers in Wales here for the last 4 years as well. So fundamentally, everything I do seems to come back to a children's book, I think, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, it's lovely to be here talking about choosing books for the Year 4 classroom today, Nikki. Thanks for inviting me.
Just before we get into the detail and look at some of the books that we've selected to talk about today, I did want to say that one of the things that I've really loved about working with you, Jo, is that as reviews editor, you really take time to get to know as much as you can. I mean, obviously you can't read every book, and that's why we have reviewers. But I do really appreciate how you try to get under the skin of all of the books before they get sent out for review. So it's almost as though they go through a double review process. And for anybody that's watching, you will be able to read a lot of those reviews on our website, which is justimagine.co.uk. So do have a look and you'll see the quality, because we've got some amazing quality from our reviewers now, haven't we?
We really have, absolutely. And if you're on social media, on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, when you follow Just Imagine on all three of those platforms, we post them up regularly, each of the reviews as they come, just to keep you in the loop of the latest ones as they're coming out. And yeah, they really are quality, fantastic reviews, and it's an absolute treat to read those as well. You almost feel like you know the book after you've read the review. And what I'm trying to work on at the moment, Nikki, is how I can actually factor in more than 24 hours to a day, so I could actually read all the books that come through the door, but I haven't worked out how to do that yet.
One final comment about reviews, and that is that a lot of our reviewers, well, they all have worked in education in one capacity or another, but they're written with a view of the classroom, aren't they? And that comes in the way that they're written, which I think is particularly helpful. But today we're going to be focusing on Year 4 in particular. And as with the other webinars, I've spent a little bit of time at the beginning drawing a very brief portrait of what a reader might look like at this stage in their reading development, bearing in mind, of course, that you have a considerable range in any classroom. I think what I wanted to say about Year 4 in particular I mean, do look at the year 3 and the year 5, because clearly there's some continuation across those years. But by and large, in year 4, we have readers who are proficient readers, and this period of time is very much about building on those successes. I think it's about resisting the pressures that can come to read on quickly and perhaps not spend the time with the depth of reading, and also to read superficially by reading too quickly. So I think there's a lot of consolidation in year 4. When I talk about reading, I often talk about learning to read being both learning the skills of reading, but also building road miles. You know, we become a good driver through learning the skills of changing the gears and how to do a 3-point turn and all the rest of it. But we don't really become a good driver, a really good driver, until we've got some road miles. And it's exactly the same with readers. You know, everything may be orchestrated and coming together, but we need those reading miles. And that's what's really happening here. What would you say, Jo, about year 4 readers?
I think you start to see with year 4 readers, I completely agree with everything you just said there, Nikki. And I think it really is about trying to encourage the kind of breadth of what's available, of what they are able to read, because it's I was listening to the year 5 session yesterday, and I fully endorse the idea that it's not just they can get on that track of like, I need a harder book, I want to read something that's bigger, that's thicker, that's got more pages in it. But I think with year 4, it's really trying to encourage that blossoming of the reader once they've got that real kind of confidence in their own self as an independent reader. And I think that for us as teachers in the classroom, although I'm not a teacher in the classroom, but for any teacher in the classroom, it's about encouraging your own knowledge and keeping your own knowledge going so that you have that ability to give children the breadth of what's available out there. So I think, really important to encourage them to, yes, feed their interests and what they really enjoy, but also to challenge them to say, have you tried this? Do you like this kind of book? So that's probably how I would see a year 4 reader for myself.
Really interesting. I think also in terms of the formation of identity, you know, we all have identities of ourselves as a reader. And I often think of year 3 and year 4 being key years when you can have a considerable influence on that by having that breadth that you've talked about. Things start to firm up a little bit, and, you know, we all start to have our own preferences. So at this point, giving them the opportunity to find out, to really find out who they are as a reader, I think is important.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. And just to add to that, I think that I do remember when I was a teacher in the classroom, how much children love to read more and more by the same author. I can remember that being a real feature of their reader identity. They couldn't get enough of the author that they really enjoyed. And of course, that all comes to an end because, of course, there is a finite number of books that any author has read. So it's, again, offering, if you like this book, you might like this kind of book by this author as well. And then you're in a whole new journey of somebody else to read as well. So again, it's having that knowledge, I think, as a teacher, to encourage children to look at books by other authors that are in a similar vein, as well as offering them something completely different as well.
And of course, the fantastic OU Reading for Pleasure teachers groups, we have to say, has done a lot to spread that work across the UK.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, completely. And also because teachers have been meeting regularly, initially in the first couple of years physically in rooms, and then kind of it went more online, and now it's kind of a bit more blended now. Teachers were then engaging in community groups of other teachers who felt as passionate about them as reading, and they were drawing on each other's interests, knowledge. So I think the the development of teachers' knowledge of children's books and how that's gone back into the classroom, the projects that teachers have taken on as part of being part of that group, and the examples of practice that they've been able to draw on to then try out in their own classroom. It's been phenomenal. Absolutely.
Should we have a look at some books? I'm sure people are itching to see some books.
Let's do that.
I thought I'd start today with a section on illustrated and series fiction. I've put these together because a lot of the series that are on the slides are also illustrated. And what a difference that is in the past 10 years, 5 years, because we did have a period where it was almost straight from picture books into very dense text. And, you know, some fantastic work being done by Alex T. Smith, Chris Riddell, Sarah McIntyre, just to name a few, who've really helped this category of books, if you like, to really burgeon. And so now there is a tremendous choice out there for teachers. Here are just a few. I particularly love, I have to say, Pippa Kernick's Indigo Wild, which is not quite full colour, but in vibrant colour, pinks, greens and yellows. So attractively produced and full of fantastic, detailed imagery. So it is about this house of magical creatures in Jellybean Crescent, sort of, not really Addams Family, I suppose, but they mystical creatures in fantasy houses, beautifully presented. Absolutely love it. And the second book in this series has just been published. We're going to have a look at an internal spread in a moment so you can see more of what I'm talking about. Also, I absolutely adore Rob Bidoff's Peanut Jones. We know Rob as an author and picture book creator, but he's proved that he can do it with his writing. So Peanut Jones is a character whose father goes missing, and she goes searching for him in this land that she creates through her magic pencil. And it's a land populated with different areas that are to do with different art movements. It's very witty, and again, just so beautifully presented. Any that you know? They don't have to be on this slide, obviously.
No, but you're just sparking some thoughts for me, actually. And I think one of the things you mentioned about this kind of illustration and the illustrated chapter books, I think it's been an incredible kind of move forwards to sort of bridge, as you say, that gap between those going from picture books into chapter book reading. But what I do love that I'm seeing now is that for older children, we've got chapter books as well that have those illustrations in them. I'm glad they're not being left out of those as well, because the experience of reading, as much as reading the text on the page, is part of the journey for you as a reader and the pleasure for you as a reader. So when you see things jumping off the page in terms of characters, I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think the Sarah McIntyre duo with the Kevin series and with the Pugs series, they did a lot of kind of of series in those that children have absolutely jumped on and loved, you know, and carried on. I've also loved to see how they use different kinds of ways of portraying the text. So when you look at I must admit, I love the Omar, the detective series. I love the humor that these books bring out in children. I love the fact that they bring out different kinds of lists, ways of portraying the information through the text. And so for me, those kinds of books have really tapped into what children want from a book, I think, really. They've also offered them in that space of like, I do love a detective book. I do love a mystery book. And those ones are a bit beyond me, but now they're coming out. So it's offering what you can have then to move forwards. I must admit, Nikki, I've just got to point out there's a wonderful, and you mentioned it in your year 5 session yesterday, but I've absolutely loved this, the Upside Down Detective Agency picture book, which is just coming out. What struck me is that there aren't that many picture books that tap into children pre-chapter books that love to read those kinds of stories and give you lots to do on the page, think about on the page. So that's, in a way, is moving the back a stage before they get to these kinds of books. But I think it's what they're offering in terms of inviting your humor, your interest in adventure, keeping the characters moving on the page so that it allows your visual skills to be developed alongside your sort of reading, decoding skills as well.
I'm just going to pick up a couple more from the slide here. First of all, the Kevin series that you've just mentioned, Philip Reeve and Sarah McIntyre, I think is easier than Pugs of the Frozen North, Oliver and the Seawigs, etc. So this would lead in very nicely to that. But I did want to pick up a wonderful partnership, Gillian Cross, who obviously has been writing children's books for many years. And this series with Alan Snow, the illustrator, who did those fabulous How Do Dinosaurs Work? How Do Dogs Work? How Do Cats Work? How Does Father Christmas Work? It's a really good partnership in this new Ollie Spark series. And of course, Nadia Shireen, coming from the world of picture books like Rob Biddulph, creating the new Grimwood series for us. So I thought I would just share a few of the internal spreads so that people can see what we're talking about. And with most of these books, you get a sort of pacing, you get some breathing space where you have a big illustration and a little bit of text, and then you might have some more dense text, obviously building your old-fashioned word, but I think still a useful one, your reading stamina. So this is from Peanut Jones, and here's another one of my favorite illustrations from this book as we look down on Peanut in her bedroom there. And there's so much that you can surmise really about her character if you bother to look around the sort of artifacts that are associated with her in her bedroom. So well worth pausing on the pictures as well as reading the text. This one is, this is from Indigo Wild. Now you can see what I mean about that very vibrant colour, not full colour, but we've got this fuchsia pink and these bright blues and sort of acid greens. And this is a text within a text. So these are all the kind of mythical creatures. This book is a great one, I think, for really sparking children's imagination. If you get the chance to read the whole book, you'll see what I mean. They're sort of cutaways of houses. And I do know that when I was that age, it would immediately have taken me to a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'd been drawing my own version of that. And the same with this book with all the mythical creatures in it. Makes me want to invent my own.
Yeah, I think actually things that you're saying about building reading stamina, it really does enable you to stop and think whilst you're reading. So it's not just that stamina, but it's that critical literacy. It's it's thinking about things, that the creative juices get going. As you say, you pick up a pencil and you want to do something like it for yourself. You have ideas, you might have questions. It might give you an idea of what you could do yourself. So I think those types of chapter books where they have that wonderful blend of the illustration, different kinds of texts as well, like this, I think really feeds to so many much of children's different interests when they're reading. Absolutely.
Quick whiz through some of the others. There's Kevin, look. Lovely page design. This one is,
I have a Kevin badge, I have to say.
Have you?
Yes, I do.
I want one.
Oh, well, I'll try to find it for you. You can have it.
Sarah's out there. Sarah, I want a Kevin badge. So
I have to say, I picked it up at a UKLA conference, so that's...
This is from Space Detectives by the wonderful Dapo Adiola, who obviously has just won the Illustrator of the Year award. This is from Loki, Louis Stowell's book. Oh, so funny. Imagine being Loki and you're sent to Earth to do your time basically and live amongst the humans and learn to be a better character. But your goody two-shoes sort of brother, Thor, is there as well. It's incredibly funny. Not
It
surprised.
is. Yeah, and
Not
it's how
surprised.
you'd imagine a child doing their own drawings to a story as well, isn't it? You know, so you can see that kind of they will make that connection when they're reading the story with those illustrations, won't they?
Yeah. This is from Grimwood. I'm really just showing people what they look like inside, so they've got a feel for them. And I could have done this the other way around, but I put picture books next. So we can't leave those wonderful picture books behind. You've mentioned that already, Jo.
Yeah. I think sorry to interrupt you there, Nikki, but I think actually that's what those books do. They prepare. They don't leave picture books behind, you know, and they don't let us forget about picture books, which means hopefully picture books will have a place still in Year 4, then, won't they?
What I do want to say, though, is that there are some books on this slide, like Anthony Brown's The Tunnel, which is psychologically a very deep story. Minnie Gray we've got on here. We'll have a look at that one in a moment. Levi Pinfold's Greenling. It's not that they can't be read by younger children, but actually to get the real depth from them, I think they're better dealt with or read later. And this comes down to what you were saying about teachers reading and really getting to not only know the book, but to understand the book. So here we've got the true story of the Three Little Pigs. Again, I know that this is a story that is read with much younger children. Often it's read as a story that just tells the fairy tale from a different point of view. But actually, there's something much more complex going on in this story. It is an introduction to an unreliable narrator. It's not just another point of view. You know, the wolf's point of view is not equally valid. And you can tell that by the voice that's employed, the gangster voice. It's an introduction to the unreliable narrator. It's a book that takes us to Shakespeare and to Edmund. So I sometimes feel it's a shame when it's just done as, well, look, here's the Three Little Pigs from another point of view. And that's why I put Year 4 upwards. Year 4 upwards for this particular book.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think it's about the sort of time when you can start getting children to think about not being taking everything we read at face value. So it can be linked to any kind of topic where you're looking at what's out there in the news and where you read it and why you read it. So it's a kind of book that will spark that kind of discussion, won't it, really?
I mean, Minnie Gray is another one. Okay, she's got quite a range of books, but The Adventures of the Dish and the Spoon, for example, is one that I would say works particularly well from Year 4 upwards. Again, because of that, you know, voice and whether we can take things at face value or not. Let's have a look at some of the
Well, I would just before you go into the pictures, the spreads there, Nikki, is just to point out with those books is that my own experience of using picture books in Year 4 and above classrooms and probably Year 3 as well, but we're talking about Year 4 is what you said about knowing the books, but actually it's about engaging with the children with the book. So I've always been a huge kind of advocate of doing philosophical inquiry in any classroom, whatever age, with whatever children, and picture books are the perfect platform. And I think these kinds of books like The Tunnel, you know, like Fearless even really as well, I'm just any books that will actually prompt sort of discussions about social justice, about deeper themes, life questions, I think are often better in a kind of sort of safe but sort of supported environment where children can ask questions and have that kind of open discussion. And that's where I think picture books are crucial in Key Stage 2 classrooms, especially as we're talking about Year 4 today.
I mean, Greenling is interesting because it's ambiguous. There's a lot of ambiguity that isn't necessarily picked up if you just read the text and a straight reading. If you're looking at the detail in this book, you're looking at the dog,
Yeah.
this other character, this domesticated animal, and how the dog responds to grooming, and what do we make of that. There's a lot in the illustration that just makes it's not clear cut, it's not black and white, it's not just one thing. And that's what I really appreciate about this book. And I, again, often read it actually with Year 5 classes, but I put it here in the Year 4 collection. Tell us a bit more about Fearless.
Yeah, well, just to say, just to respond to that idea that actually you said there's a number of meanings and things happening within the text. I think that's why it's really good to have that shared discussion with children in picture books. Picture books are good because actually you can read the book from start to finish. You have the whole story and then you can start to sort of have that shared discussion. Is because often children don't realize that there are so many different interpretations and shared different opinions until they have those shared discussions. So I think that's why it's a really important thing to do within the classroom, so that children can see, well, actually, my idea is not wrong, but it's actually not everybody's thinking the same thing as me. And it's a really powerful discussion for children to have, and to have those picture books to do it is wonderful, don't you think, really?
Mm-hmm. And also the fact that they're cultural products, and many of these, I'm thinking about Levi Pinfold again, but also Migrants here. They make lots of connections to other art movements. Not saying that you have to tell children that, because you don't want to destroy the reading of them by being overly didactic, but if you as a teacher inform yourself of the rich cultural background to them, then you're there to feed things in through that discussion. So for instance, the little greenling here just relates to so many images to do with the Green Man or Bacchus, and we have that kind of bacchanalian party going on, which makes you question if you know the story, where everybody stops going to work and they just enjoy the fruits of the land. Is that a good thing or not? I don't think there's one thing. I don't think he really does show, not tell, and it's for us to make our minds up there. But so many connections.
So an opportunity for so much rich discussion.
Connections to American Gothic and the paint, that painting. Migrants, very much like that kind of Renaissance composition. Tell us a bit more about Fearless.
Yeah, you mentioned, well, I mean, I think the other thing about picture books is that, again, the element of introducing different voices and biography in a way of, and giving different voices and sort of introducing different people that children will never have been aware of. I think the idea of reading a biography in a chapter book, you're only going to hear that one voice, but the opportunity to open up that kind of your knowledge of what's happening in the world. Picture books are really powerful, and Fearless is particularly a powerful picture book that does that, where you're introduced to somebody who really did sort of take huge risks on behalf of other people, and it doesn't pull any punches. It does. You are aware that this is a real story of somebody's real life, and there are people still related to that person still alive. And when you read those books, I think they make a huge impact on you as an individual. And again, I come back to the whole idea of having them as shared discussion, sharing books. So I know we're going to come on to reading aloud, Nikki, but the idea that you read these books together, so that children can then question and ask and understand the situation with each other and the teacher together.
I've just put the website up, bestbooksforschools.com, because the books that we're talking about here are taken from 3 packs that we have on the website. There's our best books packs, which are updated every term and tend to be books that have been published in the previous 6 months, so all new titles. We have Reading Bug, which is all about hooking readers that might be harder to reach. I'm avoiding the label reluctant reader there. And also the Teacher's Treasures, which are well-loved favourites, which obviously the true story of the three little pigs and the tunnel would be part of that. But I put it up because you mentioned picture book biographies, and we have a huge selection actually just of picture book biographies as well.
That's a very good one as well, that one.
Let's have a look. So let's not get too serious. Let's have a bit of fun as well.
Yes.
Poltergeist. Yes. I think, having very accessible picture books. So for children that might still acquiring those reading skills, you want them still to have the challenge of, material that makes them think or makes them laugh. Jokes often are cognitively very challenging. Poltergeist is a favourite of mine. It's a sort of riff on the chicken that crossed the road. So the chicken is about to cross the road, gets run over by a truck, and becomes a poultrygeist, but doesn't actually believe that that's what he is. And the other creatures have got to try and convince him that he is a poultrygeist. I know you love this one, Jo.
Very much so. Very, very much so, yes.
So I mean, Minnie Gray. No, after you.
No, just that actually, the actual spread that you've shown there captures everything that I just love about this book, that it offers for children. It has it has a story, it has the creative theatre stage, so you think about them as actors. You have characters in the form of the insects. You've got the sort of timeline with the tape measure that's giving you that sort of extra information, and you've got those strips at the side, which is actually giving you some more information, but also, like you said, it's not all serious, although there is serious tones in there. It's that humor and that kind of voice that comes through, of that there is a sort of like fun element to the book as well. It's totally creative, and it makes you want to sit down and do something similar, like you said. I'd love to have a big piece of paper and try something like that. So if Minnie Gray's listening and she wants to do a workshop, I'll join in that happily.
There'll be classrooms all over the country that are making shoebox theatres. I'm convinced.
Definitely, yes.
That. And of course, somebody else who does this really well is Marcia Williams.
Oh, yeah.
Similar sort of thing. A book that can be read a little bit like the old Rupert Bear cartoons from the Sunday Express, where you had 3 different ways of reading that text: the caption, the longer narrative, and the dialogue in the comic illustration. So both of these author illustrators are doing that. You can read this in different ways, and you can access different parts of the text. Actually, I missed out another important part, which of course is the pictures on their own.
It is, and I think the other persons that come to mind for me when I think of this book by Minnie Gray, and other books by Minnie Gray as well, is Emily Gravitz and also Alan Alberg, in the way that they play with words so cleverly, but also that makes you laugh. They're puns, and so you've got to look at everything they do on the page to see if you can see anything else. And absolutely, this book, it captures all of those things.
So that leads us in very nicely to the importance of laughter and having a laugh. Only I didn't put any books in because we've talked about that a little bit.
We have, yeah.
It's vitally important. Also, nonfiction is part of reading for pleasure. And we've been talking about nonfiction books for the classroom. I really wanted to talk a little bit about nonfiction beyond the curriculum. I know I've got Mummies Unwrapped there, and of course ancient Egyptians are a very popular topic, but I think mummies are popular whether they're in the curriculum or not. There's something endlessly fascinating about them. But it is important that we don't think about nonfiction as being only the books that support the curriculum.
I agree, actually, and I think one of the things that threads that you've had running through these sessions, Nikki, is working with children's interests. And I think that's where nonfiction can come into that as well. That idea that actually they can provide that place for children to actually tap into what their interests are. And any classroom needs to keep refreshing that, because children go in and out of interests. They find other things that they get into. So I don't think there's a limit to the subject matters that you can have within your nonfiction collection. They shouldn't just be curriculum supported, but children's interest supported as well. And that's why I would say, yes, it does. There is no limit, and there's of what you can have within that. And I think also it's worth thinking about, again, when we talk about teachers' knowledge, is perhaps reiterating here as well the importance again of teachers reading the non-fiction picture books, because we can assume a big picture book about mummies or women who led the way, everything you know about dinosaurs. You might make assumptions about what age range it suits, but I think there's a whole wealth of kind of picture books that are suited to quite young children in the early years and key stage 1 or foundation phase, as we say here in Wales. And also there are non-fiction books which are quite challenging, so they might look really colourful, but in the depth and density within those books is probably more suited to an upper key stage 2 reader. And so I think it's really important that you get to know what books fit and sit. That doesn't mean to say they can't sit either side as well, because if they're shared, that's fine. But it's finding out what fits the kind of reader that you have within your classroom, isn't it? The ability.
Has to be said, this lower key stage 2 is perhaps the most challenging for finding non-fiction.
I agree.
There are some, I think Nosy Crow are producing some very good lower key stage 2 non-fiction books. I think these are doing an excellent job. There are other publishers out there as well, but I just wanted to say, sometimes because they're highly illustrated, we think that it's the point that you've been making really, we think that they're easier to read, and there may be a way that you can take some information, but the bulk of the text might be more complicated. It's interesting. Everything you know about dinosaurs is wrong. I've put that here in year 4, because if you have that as an interest, this book is going to give you all the technical information that you want. It's not going to dumb down, but it will be for a keen reader in year 4. So equally, we might expect it to still be appearing in year 5 or year 6. It's a book that's got a bit of longevity in it.
Yeah.
And
I agree. Sorry, Nikki. Sorry, I interrupted you then. Sorry.
No.
You just made me think about a book that I've recently read in terms of it might look for a younger book. I've got it here actually. It's a Cicada book. It's called The History of Cars, and on the surface it looks like it would be for a younger reader. But actually, when you get into the book, it's got so many different ways of reading. It's got so many different facts and ways of thinking about cars, and raises so many questions about cars and consumption and fuel consumption, etc., that don't write it off in a key stage 2 in a year 4 classroom, because it's the sort of subject matter that there will be probably at least one, probably many more than one children in that class who actually are quite fascinated by cars. So it's finding books that you look into and you realize surface level it looks quite cartoony, it's got that comic strip, but actually the depth of the information in there would suit an older year 4 reader as well. So I totally agree.
Before we move on, just a couple of quick points about book collections in classrooms. And you and I probably have both gone into classrooms where the books that were on the bookshelf are there because they were inherited from the year before. I'm sure that's not actually the people are listening to this webinar, because the chances are they're listening to the webinar because they're already very keen and doing a lot of good work with children's books in their classrooms. But I think that notion of taking a fresh look at the beginning of the year, just not accepting what's there just because it is there, and also making sure that what you have available at the end of the year is not necessarily what was there at the beginning of the year, because you need fresh things to be injected, even if you hide some of them and bring them out later. I think that's really vital too.
Yeah, if you put I think it can overwhelm if children see too many books. So it could be that you just rotate. I remember a teacher that I used to work with told in my very early years of teaching told me that she kept books in her cupboard and rotated them so that the children always felt that was fresh new books coming out, and they were always interested then in the book corner, and that stayed with me throughout my career. And I think there's definitely something that I would encourage anybody to do, that really, because children don't need too much choice initially. Once you know what they like, you can then guide them. I'm not saying you hide them in your cupboard, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that you might have times when you highlight groups of books. So you might have them all out there, but you might have a display area where you change the displays of the books that the children can see, you know.
Mr. Shaha and his marvelous machines, thinking about how important it is we have books about hobbies and making and doing. This one is from Football Superstars. Women Who Led the Way. Do you know this one, Jo?
I do. I love this one. Yeah, I can see it just sitting to my right of in my eye. I think the level of this is a perfect actually pitched for year 4. I think this book, and I think Otterbury do that really well, because they've done another one recently called Water, about water in a similar way, and the number of the level of information on the page is enough information, but it also points you in the direction to find out more as well. Also, the illustrations are beautiful, really, and you've got that kind of speech bubble. You've got little inserts as well to keep the interest of the reader. So you could actually go back and just skim and scan through the book. You don't have to read it from front to back, you know. And the wealth and range of women explorers in there is incredible. And it will probably introduce you, I'm talking about biography again, to people that you would never, ever have heard about or come across in your life until you read this book.
Exactly. And a call out for Mick Manning and Britta Grandstrom, who are so good at doing this.
Absolutely.
And in laying out a page, because there are some books out there that I probably won't mention them all now, but they are they look attractive, but they are quite difficult to navigate your way around the page. And I think with year 4, it's really important to keep some clarity in the layout. So again, Mick Manning, Britta Grandstrom are superb at that. You're talking about the Catherine Barr book, Water.
I am.
Really Small have some of the best design around. So important.
Yeah, and I think it's about actually not having every page the same, but having a continuity on the page. The children know what they're going to find on that page. They'll have a story. They might have some extra information. There might be some speech, you know, whatever. But each book will have its own kind of setup in terms of what the double spread will offer. So children are aware of where they can navigate to read the information they want. And those books do that really, really well.
And I want to give a call out here to what Nosy Crow are doing at the moment. Their design, again, always, you know, I won't say always, but the books that I'm seeing are so beautifully and clearly designed, and some great partnerships going on with the British Museum and other associations as well.
Yeah.
This one is from A Year in Fleurville. I've got cooking on my mind here. Just, you know, just a lovely aesthetic book. Absolutely love that.
Beautiful, isn't it?
And David Olusoga, you know, the illustrated Black and British.
Yes.
So interesting. If anybody gets the chance to listen to the conversation that I had with him, one of the things that he said that's really stuck in my mind is the idea of not being not thinking that history is just about biography, that we sort of have to escape from biography and look at the sort of trends and themes and ideas across time. And then I started thinking about the books that are being produced and how many of them are actually biographical in their focus. Anyway, wonderful book, this one. So rhyme, rhythm and poetry. Are you a poetry fan?
I don't read enough poetry, but I love poetry, if that makes sense. So I read it, but I don't, I'm not a rereader, which is, I don't know. So, but as a teacher, poetry was a staple in my classroom. And I think I read more poetry when I was a primary school teacher than when I haven't been a primary school teacher. Because I found that with poetry, you could bring children to life in terms of like they would become actors, they would give you voices. Somehow poetry brings out different characteristics in children that reading aloud other text doesn't. You said something really lovely about poetry yesterday in your year 5, and I made a note of it, Nikki. It says they're perfect little stories wrapped up as little treasures. And I think they are. When you find one, I used to reread certain poems as I used to reread certain short stories on the request of the children all of the time. So they would find poems that they liked and ask you to read them again and again. They are little treasures, aren't they?
I also talked previously about how you can influence the mood of a class.
Yes.
Just by choosing an upbeat poem can really change, a mood. I think I absolutely love that about poetry. Yeah. And I would say that, every teacher should have one good poetry collection, an anthology. I'm not just talking about the books that you have on the bookshelf, but a teacher's anthology that they know and get to know really well, and that they can dip into all those spare minutes in the day. This is where people that are watching are throwing their hands up and saying, we don't have any spare minutes of the day. But those little bits of extra time that you suddenly find are available.
And actually, I had the Puffin classics. Those are my staple. When so we're going back now, 20, and they're classics. If we're talking about classics, I still think they have got a real place in the classroom. I had about 4 or 5 different, I don't know how many there are, but I definitely had 4 Puffin classics with a whole collection of poets, Michael Rosen, Roger McGough, lots of different poets, some more well known than others, some themed poems, usually lots of silly poems, lots of rhyming poems that you could join in with. And those were the kinds of poetry that you could, as you say about mood changing, if things just needed to just change direction, you just need to bring them all back down, get one of the children to choose one of the books, find one of the poems, and we'd sit down and read it. And inevitably, similar poems always got the same poems would say, read that one. So Puffin classics it was for me in those days, but I still would recommend them. I think they're great. But there's so much coming out now. Otter Barry are coming out with some incredibly wonderful poetry collections of late. I'm sure you're going to mention some others that I haven't thought about, so I didn't want to just say one publisher, but certainly the collections that they're bringing out are excellent.
Yeah, I suppose I want to give a heads up as well to another small publisher, Troika, for what they're doing.
Troika, yes.
Macmillan for years have been, it's a bigger publisher, but for years, Gabby Morgan at Macmillan has really been flying the poetry banner. Bloomsbury are doing some good poetry as well. And other publishers, of course.
Yes.
But here I'm just going to pick up Matt Goodfellow, who he's doing some absolutely tremendous stuff. Have a look for Caterpillar Cake for younger children, which is published by Otter Barry. But Bright Bursts of Colour. The colours in this book are the wide range of moods and tone that you have. You might be forgiven if you just look at the cover of thinking it's one kind of poem, the funny poem. But what Matt has is this full tonal range of emotions. Kate Wakeling, Cloud Super, second collection from the Emma Press. Kate having won the Clipper Award, and let's give the shout out to CLPE and the Clipper Award and everything that they've done.
Oh,
As well.
Yeah. And I think children learn poems they learn to say them really quickly. I can remember tidying up time in my classroom. Again, you just sparked a memory, Nikki, actually, of favourite poems. You'd tidy up to a favourite poem and see if you could tidy up by the time you finish saying the poem altogether, and it just focused the mind. Poems can do so many different things, really. And they are just something that captures something in time that you can, as you say, opens up a new world of thinking for children. And some of these poetry books also lend themselves to performing as well. So children get that kind of urge to perform a poem as well, because that's something which, some children will enjoy more than others, obviously.
Just the last few points, really. Always checking that we are being inclusive. These have obviously cropped up earlier in the presentation. But the point that I have been making is that inclusivity and representation isn't just about our fiction. Let's keep an eye on our non-fiction as well and make sure that that's fully inclusive, as well as our poetry. This is a new series. I'll just pick out the book in the middle, Remy Blackwood, Future Hero, just published. Have you read this one, Jo?
I've read, I haven't finished it. So I'm reading, I've read the first 100 pages of it, and then I had to send it to a reviewer. So I haven't finished it. At some point I will. It's really good. That doesn't really capture it, really. But the concept of it, of where all these books, the Future Hero series, is really, really quite original what they're doing, isn't it?
Brilliant. And then to end up with year 4, all years actually, but in year 4, let's read aloud, read aloud, read aloud, because we're going to be showing children, by reading aloud to them, the image of their future reading selves, as Margaret Meek said, because you can read things that the children won't be able to read for themselves yet, but can access through your read aloud. Just some books on here, some of my favourites for reading in year 4, some well-established classics, as well as some newer books here. I have to say I Was a Rat and Clockwork, which I think is older, but I Was a Rat, it's one of my favourite Philip Pullman books, actually.
Actually, Clockwork was one of mine, Nikki, funnily enough. Yes, so there we go.
I think also I want to say something here about the opportunity for quiet books, because they're not necessarily the books that children gravitate towards themselves. And there can be a tendency, I think, just to read to children the books that they are picking up and reading for themselves. I see an opportunity here with something like Linda Newbury's Lob, for instance. It's quiet, it's reflective. I know that I can really draw readers in when I read that book aloud to them. And so that's one of the, not the only consideration, but it's one of the considerations that I would have when I'm selecting a book to read aloud. And then some authors who I personally think all children should experience at some point in their primary career. People like Burley Doherty, such wonderful wordsmiths. So, thinking about the language, not just thinking at plot level or crowd pleasing level, because again, we can make those books accessible through our reading aloud. I've got some fairy tales on there. They're Welsh, so maybe you should comment on that.
Well, yeah, you're right, absolutely. I picked that one out as well when you were talking about reading aloud, was because first and foremost, shorts. Here it is. I've got it right at my side. Short stories for sure is one of my favourite things to do, is to read short stories and to reread the favourite short story from the collections. I'd love to be a teacher in the classroom and that's gone off the screen, and have this book to read aloud. This was a shortlisted book on this year's Teen Anog book award. It's got so many different Welsh short stories in it that you might not have heard about, as well as some quite well-known ones, and they're told so well by Claire Fayer. She does it so well. So there's one of Irish fairy tales, I think, myths and legends as well. So
I believe Scottish as well.
Oh, is that? Yeah, I haven't seen that one. So yeah, so there's all. So really, really good collection for the classroom. I highly recommend that one too. And I think just to pick up on what you said about the quiet stories, I think with reading aloud and stories to choose is that it is an opportunity to select books that perhaps are going to extend children's vocabulary, maybe offer a different kind of different kind of language patterns that will maybe, I don't know, develop children's cognitive abilities, their ability to be critical and their questions. So I think you can give those kinds of reading aloud experiences that maybe children might not have, you saying, chosen to pick up for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think if you've got it as a regular practice within your classroom across the year, you can capture all of those different ways: short stories, humor, favorite readers that the children are loving, so that you can read it and share it together, ones they might not have thought about, those quiet stories. You can try and balance a bit of everything, can't you, really, if you've got it regularly as a practice in your classroom.
I was talking to Nicolette Jones earlier, who is the Sunday Times children's book reviews editor. And we were talking about giving children access to different voices, including voices from classic fiction. Yeah. So here's an opportunity for introducing Edith Nesbit or Eric Kastner, like Emil and the Detectives, because these books are written at different points in time. We are making that voice accessible. We're developing that ear for reading. As it happens, we were talking about Shakespeare and how you can tune in. If you've heard enough of it and you've seen enough of it, you stop thinking about it as something strange and difficult. And I think it's the same with classic children's literature as well. Great for reading aloud.
Yeah, and I think also those talking about reading aloud, but also in terms of introducing classics to children, going back to Marcia Williams, you just sparked a memory, finding those kinds of comic strip graphic novels that are telling the stories through kind of the comic strip graphic novel genre. And I know Marcia Williams has done many of those, but there's so many more coming out as well that are of more recent than that now as well, aren't there?
Well, Jo, it's been a pleasure spending this hour with you, exploring the delights of Year 4 fiction. Obviously, the books that we've talked about today are just representative of different kinds of ideas. There are many more brilliant books out there for Year 4. I'd like to thank you for joining us and for listening in today. And I'd love to thank my special guest, Jo Bowers, as well. So thank you so much, and hope to see you again next time. If you haven't already come across them, we have choosing books for the classroom for years 1 up to year 6. Year 6 will be recorded very soon. So look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, Jo.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Nikki. Thank you very much.